I started to see a change that really kind of worried me a little bit. And I thought maybe if I wrote about my experience, it could maybe help people out. I think that's true of any artist. I mean, by definition, you're never satisfied with where you are. You always want to get further. One of the biggest pieces of advice I got early on was they said, well, who's your target audience? I would like to have some kind of guidance, somebody looking over my shoulder to make sure I'm going down the right directions. How about a cover? You'd think that's pretty simple, but I never realized how much effort goes into picking a cover. I think in essence, what I'm trying to do through the book is to show, with hopefully a little humor, it's all going to be okay, and don't be afraid of life. Just get involved.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to 10 Hut Media. Today I have the pleasure of sitting down with debut author Dr. Doug Johnson, whose incredible journey proves that life doesn't have to follow just one path. Doug has worn many hats. He's been a doctor, military officer, flight surgeon, cancer specialist, commercial pilot, artist, and more. His memoir takes us through a lifetime of exploration, reinvention, and adventure. During our conversation, we chatted about his advice to young people about trying everything, the biggest lessons from his many careers, what he hopes readers take away from his book, and his experience working with 10 Hut Media. Doug's story is a testament to curiosity, resilience, and lifelong learning, and I can't wait for you to hear it. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I am so excited to have new writer Doug Johnson here joining us. Doug, we are so excited to have you, and I can't wait to talk about your career.
Well, I appreciate you having me here.
And with that, we'll just jump into the first question. And, it's one of those early life questions. And you were born at West Point and grew up as what is called as an Air Force brat. So how did your early career experiences of regularly relocating shape your worldview and eventual career choices?
Well, there's a lot to unpack in that question, but the life of a military brat, as I'm sure you know, involves a lot of moves all over the world. And I think the experience of going around to different states and different countries and living, from a very early age, you realize that you are not the center of the universe by any means. And you see, no matter where you go in the world, that all cultures seem to have same basic principles. They want their kids to have a roof over their head. They want them to have a hot meal in their bellies, and they want them to have a better lot in life than their parents had. When you go to these other places, whether it's moving from New York to Arizona to Kansas to Nebraska to wherever, or you're going to Spain or England or wherever, you realize that you're not the center, and you need to learn to be quiet and listen and learn to adapt to other cultures. So I think that's helped me through the years, because I really find that I'm very interested in other cultures and other areas. And it seems like no matter where I go, you could stick me anywhere in the world and I'd find something to enjoy there. That has really kind of helped shape how I've become that. And a lot of that has to do with the military brat experience. The military brat experience also has some other unique features, and a lot of this has been written about military brats, but they sort of have certain characteristics. Number one, they tend to be very independent because you move around so much that you don't carry a support structure with you. You need to have that internalized. So as a military brat, you learn that you are directly responsible for not only your own actions, but your own actions have an impact on your military parent. And if you act up and mess up, it not only affects your own life, but it can directly involve the career or torpedo the career of a military parent. So a lot of responsibilities put on you very early on. The other thing about the military brats is they tend to be, I won't say loners, but they tend to be comfortable in their own skin. Because you move around so much, you develop a little bit of a shell around you, as opposed to a lot of people. I'm somewhat envious. I hear these people, I've known this person since high school, blah, blah, blah. Well, you realize you don't really become very close with many people, because you realize within 6 to 12 months, they're going to be gone from your life. And it's that way over and over and over again. Those few people you do let in you become fiercely loyal to. So you have the friendships you have are very, very tight, but it's just expected that people are going to come in and out of your life like a revolving door. In my particular circumstance, my 12 years of grade school, I attended 11 different schools throughout the world. So the irony there is that you start doing it long enough and you do occasionally see the same people again because their parents will rotate through to a different base and what have you. So I think that's a long answer to your question, but I think that the military brat experience teaches you to be independent, teaches you to be creative, because when you move to places, you don't have a lot of friends when you first move there. So you need to have creative play. You need to, I mean, for me, my savior was the library. No matter which base we go to around the world, I go to the library. I love to read, especially science fiction. So I'd spend months doing that. And usually the military would transfer you in June, and school doesn't start till September. So you have 2 or 3 months. And those are my library months. So anyway, that's pretty much how my early years kind of impacted my life.
I mean, and then even more so because you then served as both an active duty and reserve U.S. Air Force colonel while maintaining a distinguished medical career. So that goes back to like being really self-resilient and really on top of things. How did you balance those demanding dual roles?
It sounds like it would be complex, but it's actually pretty straightforward because in my particular life, everything's all intertwined. That's why the title of this book, A Portrait of a Kaleidoscope Life. My life really is like looking through a kaleidoscope. Every time you do a little subtle twist and turn, the same elements are all in the kaleidoscope, but the view is completely different. And for me, the military was blended into the civilian, the medical, the aviation, the artistic, all that kind of came together. And I found that one facilitated the other in different ways all throughout my career. So when I decided to attempt to go to medical school, I applied and got into medical school. And then I realized, don't have any real way to pay for that. So I looked around, and because my dad had been in the military, especially in personnel, he heard about some of these scholarship programs. And one of them that's around even today is called HPSP, the Health Profession Scholarship Program. And the way it works is you have to be accepted to a medical school. But once you're accepted, you can apply for one of these HPSP scholarships. And they pick the best of the best in their view for what they're looking for. Only about 10 or 15% of the people that have even been accepted to medical school are even considered for an HPSP scholarship. But I was lucky enough to apply and get awarded one of those. So the military, right off the bat, was involved in my medical career because they paid for it. So I got a stipend, and they paid for all my tuition and books and fees. And in the summers, I would go and do some military training or rotating through different military hospitals. So I came out of the medical school debt-free, which was pretty unique in today's day and age. And I'd been a military brat before, so I knew what it was like to be on a base and, the ins and outs of it. So it was pretty much a chip shot. Interestingly, I decided to stay in the military. I ended up staying on active duty for 8 years, which is a whole interesting story in and of itself. But even when I had the option to leave, I elected to stay in the reserves because I found I was getting a lot out of it. Number one, from the tactical level, I'd participated in the design of a new hospital system out at Travis Air Force Base in Northern California. And it takes years to get the plans together. Well, when I finally got out, I said, I'd kind of like to see how this all turns out. So I decided to stay in the reserves, and I came back and stayed in for a total of 16 more years in the reserves. During that time, they give you different educational opportunities. One of my other passions is aviation, so they sent me to flight surgery school. So in addition to being a cancer specialist, I was a flight surgeon, could fly in the back of anything that had more than one seat. And then they allowed you to go to different professional schools, Air Command and Staff College and Air War College, which sounds very militaristic, but basically it's the military equivalent of an MBA. So in essence, got your MBA through them. And I found that a lot of those skills in business administration and also the leadership skills they teach were very translatable into my civilian life. And actually, I think facilitated me getting where I got in civilian life was directly related to the training I had on the military side. And it was just a refreshing change. And every year, you're going away to camp for 2 weeks. So always had something to look forward to, and it's always different every time.
Absolutely. Just a little summer break sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a special position. I ended up in the reserves. There's this old adage that if you stay in the military long enough, you end up flying a desk. So, which the pilots don't really like, but it's true even in the medical. I mean, I started doing medicine, obviously in the military, but then as you go on, you progress up and you do more and more administrative / leadership things. And the particular track of the Reserve Corps I was in had something called the IMA program, Independent Mobilization Augmentee. And back in the day, the theory was that if the balloon went up and there was going to be a war with a foreign adversary and all the medical staff at a particular medical center had to move out to be deployed. For instance, Travis Air Force Base had a whole hospital in mothballs in England. So if they had to go open up that hospital, they needed people to take care of the store at home. And so we would be assigned to a position. So we would shadow somebody. So I ended up shadowing different people rising through the ranks, ended up being the IMA to the wing commander out there. So how it ended up was that when I would be out there for the 2 weeks, he knew he could go off and do something else. So I just kind of backfilled for him doing the leadership stuff.
He had a stand-in for him.
Right, exactly.
Interesting.
So anyway, that was very, very good. And I really enjoyed that.
And you've mentioned, ever so often, you've been mentioning this creativity that you have, that it lies within like the heart of what you do specifically. How does your artistic perspective influence your approach to medicine and aviation now?
Those things, believe it or not, again, they sound different, but they're all tied together. They really are. I mean, in fact, even down to the simple things. You look at pilots and artists and doctors, 1/3 of them are left-handed. Whereas I'm also
left-handed.
So there you go. And that's so creators, for whatever reason, tend to be left-handed. And those professions involve a lot of three-dimensional thinking. I mean, if you take it from the obvious, okay, we'll start off with the aviation, which is one of my passions since youth. As a pilot, you're always thinking in 3 dimensions, from when you're doing a flight plan to when you're actually in the air. What airspaces can you go in at what altitudes, and how do you avoid the weather at different altitudes or icing? If a problem comes up in the air, you can't just pull off and, go to a gas station. You need to do some problem solving. So there's a lot of creativity involved in the aviation side of things. In the art, obviously, especially I'm an artist that does oil painting. So that's taking the world in 3 dimensions and trying to translate it to a 2-dimensional surface, so that when somebody looks at it, their mind can blow it back out into a 3-dimensional realization of what it is. So there's that creativity of trying to make 3D into 2D and reinterpret it. Well, it turns out in medicine, especially the career field I was in as a radiation oncologist, it's the same thing. We're always thinking about targeting. If I'm trying to target a tumor in the middle of the belly, how can I aim the beams so they're not going to cause too much problem to the nearby organs, the kidneys or the liver or the stomach? How do you arrange things in 3 dimensions so that you target one thing while protecting other things? In fact, it's funny now that my art career has really blossomed. I talked to some of the people I knew many years ago when I was out at Stanford doing my residency. My fellow residents at the time, it turns out, would even comment from across the room. They could tell which were my patient images, because one of the things you had to do in radiation oncology, for instance, if you had to treat something in somebody's chest, you took a chest x-ray and then you drew on there where they wanted to create special lead blocks to shield the lungs and what have you. And my one partner used to say that, everybody else's blocks look like ice cubes, and like that. And then he said, you see Johnson's blocks that look like a swan or an angel and all that stuff. And apparently I used to drive the machine shop crazy because they actually had to cut the lead blocks along those compact square lines. But that has kind of followed along. So I guess even back in those days, it was kind of all tied together.
There was always lines happening and there was always a bit of creativity happening. Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep.
And then with that creativity, you've been a painter for over 50 years, which is just so many phases of life. I mean, that is just incredible. how does your painting style reflect your like varied life experience? I am an art history person myself, so I love seeing painters' art change throughout their period. I mean, Monet, like you can see the gradual loss of his eyesight as you look at them. So I'm curious on like how does your painting style reflect all of these life experiences that you've had?
Well, my earliest painting was actually as a kid drawing airplanes, and I would sketch planes and spaceships and diagrams of things I was making, which was very exciting to my art teacher, but not very exciting to the math professor as he's sitting there in the class and I'm drawing it. But that started off with a very technical, detailed kind of thing. I was such a nerd. I used to draw schematic sketches of satellites when they went in orbit. So
that's cool.
I went from those pencil and ink drawings to a flash forward to when I was in college. I actually got my very first apartment in my sophomore year off campus. And it was all I could scrape together to get the rent together to pay for the rent for the apartment. And I remember sitting in there the first week and I'm looking around at the walls, these big white walls, and had nothing to put on the walls. So I said, well, this won't do. I went to the arts and crafts store and found this kit for $10. You get a kit and have enough materials in there to paint 2 paintings. And I bought a book. So I read the book and I, ABCs and how to do this, that, and everything. And I basically painted a couple pictures to hang on the wall. And I was trying to figure, well, what do I want to paint a picture of? And I said, well, I've lived all these different places. Why don't I paint a picture of where I used to live? So I think the very first picture I painted was a picture of the desert, high desert in Southern California, where I graduated from high school, and still have that painting today. But anyway, so did that. And then as life evolved, I ended up meeting my wife, Sue, and we got married. And when we would go around the world on trips, we would find that, we'd take our cameras and add all the heavy stuff and we'd take 1,000 pictures. You get home and get them developed. You look at them once and you put them in a drawer and never see them again. And I thought that wasn't very satisfying. So I entered a phase where I would look through those photos and I'd say, well, that was a nice mountain here. And I like that stream from there. And I like this building. And I like this woman sitting over here with a certain style of clothing on. And I would put them all I'd make up a scene in my head, talk about the creativity, kind of make it up and lay it out. And I would paint that. And then we would hang that one painting on the wall. So that one painting became the entire trip reduced to one particular image. So I did that for many years. And then took off some time off when I had my own children. And then later on, I got back into it and I started really painting to try to get the technique up and improve technique. Did a lot of figure painting, a lot of landscape painting. I tried out talking about art history. I must be the last guy on earth that ever heard of an artist by the name of Jackson Pollock. But I looked at his stuff and I said, number one, that guy's crazy. And number two, I wonder if I can do that. So if any reviewers have not seen Jackson Pollock, just look him up. He's known as the drip painter, that kind of thing. But I'd put up some canvases. I'd put them on the table out of my art studio. And it turns out I spent more time figuring out how I wanted to put those drips and paints and things on there and splashes, more time than I did with a conventional landscape scene. So and to this day, there's paint on my ceiling and on all my walls from those Jackson Pollock attempts. Anyway, so I went to that phase of more the modern art. And then I've come full circle because I'd also switched to acrylics. And I found that acrylics, I couldn't really do a lot of blending for outside skies when they dry so fast in the open air that I've gone back to oil painting now. In fact, I just returned yesterday from a week-long trip to Central Florida. I was one of 23 invited artists from around the country to paint at a place that uses the proceeds for the paintings to benefit the tidal river basin there. And what have you. So, and you get to meet some amazing people and everybody's got a different technique. And I just love learning that about the different artists. I think that's true of any artist. I mean, by definition, you're never satisfied with where you are. You always want to get further.
I think this idea of like having the different uses of painting throughout your life is just so cool to be like, it's always there, but it's always in different facets of things.
Right.
Now, you've also been writing. Obviously, we talked about your book a little bit. But which of those elements of life like emerged first? Did your writing come first, or did your painting come first and writing come afterwards?
It depends on whether you count those little sketches. Those little sketches as a kid, that probably came first. But I think the first thing that kind of drove my entire life was the passion for aviation. I mean, I was a product of the 50s and 60s, and everybody in those days wanted to be an astronaut, right? I mean, that was the pinnacle and what we all aimed for. Everything I did was centered around aviation, whether it was sketching or even writing, because I started writing in high school and actually wrote essays, even wrote a short story, which I thought was pretty good, actually. It was a science fiction story and had a big premise, and so I thought it was pretty well done. The teachers thought it was great. And then we did another move in the military, and it went in. Movers came and packed it away in a box that was totally lost. So I lost all the stuff I'd written. Talk about different phases of writing. I put that aside when I started doing a lot of research in medicine, because when you start publishing papers, that is a completely different type of writing, scientific writing. I'll never forget the very first paper I wrote, cancer treatment technique, when I was at Stanford. One of the nice thing about technical writing is that your co-authors will critique it for you. So you have almost your own internal critique. Well, one of the co-authors on the paper is this physicist. And he got the paper back. I got the paper back from him, and I thought he'd spilled a whole bottle of red ink on it. I mean, it's like, whoa. And because he said, "You've been writing in prose, haven't you?" And I said, "Well, that's how I, kind of trained. I took creative writing in high school and blah, blah, blah." He goes, "Well, you need to get over that. If you're going to write scientific papers, every word needs to be parsed and cut down." And, he's putting, I won't even write what he was writing in the margins, but suffice it to say, he thought a lot of it needed to go away. So, what used to be like a 30-page essay, you had to condense down into like 3 pages of hardcore writing. Wow. So that occupied me for decades, because I was doing a lot of scientific writing. I ended up writing some research trials for national cancer trials, and certainly would write results papers. Ended up with, I don't know, somewhere between 60 and 70 publications in scientific literature. And it's only been more recently that this whole idea of writing a book came about. In fact, some people, are asking me, well, why, number one, why'd you decide to write a book? And number two, why'd you decide to do it now? Well, the idea to write the book actually came from my patients, because my medical career, we didn't really touch on that, but I started off after medicine, did internal medicine for a while. And then I did radiation oncology, because I really love physics and all that. And I like really trying to help people out. So I did radiation oncology for adults and children for about 40 years. The patients that I would see every week on treatment, and they become like family. I mean, you get to know these people over decades, hopefully, if they survive, and more of them were. They kept saying, "What'd you do this week, doc?" I'd ask them what they're doing or how they're feeling. They said, "What'd you do?" And we go back and forth in this. And finally, someone said, "Well, doc, you realize nobody's going to believe this. You need to write it down, because they're going to pull the BS card when you say this, unless you start to write it down." So they kind of planted that seed probably 10, 20 years ago. And then another thing happened as my kids grew up, and then I start to see their children growing up. I started to see a change that really kind of worried me a little bit. And I thought maybe if I wrote about my experience, it could maybe help people out. Now, to unpack all that, so you understand what I'm talking about there, back in, the children of the 60s and 70s and up to the late 70s, I would say, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have a lot of the social media. We didn't have a lot of information about what we're going to do in life. So you'd say, well, how did you decide what you want to do in life? Well, back in those days, it was either by something you read about, or your parents or their friends talked to you about. And I'd say the majority of people, that's how they chose a career. And they would do it. And if it didn't work out, they didn't like it after doing it for a while, they'd do something else. And that was just expected. No harm, no foul, no judgment. And what I'd seen more recently is almost a fear of people to make any decision at all, because they are bombarded from, their teenage years on with so many choices. I mean, the TV's telling them to do this, the radio's saying to do that. Their friends are saying this, the computer, they look up things, and there's endless boundaries that I think I've seen that they're almost paralyzed, and they're so afraid of making a bad decision that they just stand by the sidelines and don't jump in and do anything. So you hear a lot of people talking about 30 is the new 20 because it takes that long to mature. Well, I think a lot of it is they're just paralyzed and they're not doing anything. So they don't know what they want to do, and they're afraid of making a mistake. So what I wrote down was my experiences, and I made a bunch of mistakes. I mean, I tried one thing, that didn't work out. And I tried something else, and you know what? It all works out, and it's all fine, and don't be afraid of it, and just jump in and do it, and you'll be successful. And that was kind of the impetus to really get writing on this. I actually, kind of as a parallel thing, I was asked to be a speaker for several years at a group here in this region called the Joe Berg Society. The Joe Berg Society, which quite honestly I had never heard of, but it was formulated back in the late 50s and early 60s, and at one time had over 1,000 chapters in the United States. And it was basically what we would now call STEM exposure for people, for highly functioning high school kids nominated by their guidance counselors from schools around any particular region. They would be selected to participate in a series of discussions where they would go out to somebody's office and see, well, what does a lawyer do for a day? Spend an hour talking about that. Or they came to my clinic and learned about cancer treatment and physics. Or they could go to the head of a perfume company and then learn about how you fabricate using chemistry and all that. So as a way to expose kids to sciences and math, and later on it was expanded to the humanities as well. So they go to a theater and learn, what people do there. Well, anyway, so I was asked to speak to them, and I remember, so these are highly functioning kids. I'd sit down in front of them, and there's 50 kids nervously, sitting in the carpet in my waiting room. I say, okay, who near knows exactly what they want to do in life? And you could feel the tension rise in the room. I mean, everybody gets quiet, and you could just feel it. And I basically said, you know what? Don't worry about it. Nobody knows what they want to do now. And the one thing I can guarantee you is anything you think you want to do now, probably you're not going to be doing that down the road, but it's going to be okay. And you could hear a literal sigh of relief from all these kids. And that's, I think, in essence, what I'm trying to do through the book is to show, with hopefully a little humor, that it's all going to be okay, and don't be afraid of life. Just get involved.
That's incredible. And it's so important nowadays, again, with all of these choices that we can do, and we feel like we need to make the right choice. And what is the right choice? It's good to be reminded that there's not a right choice, that it could be whatever choice you want it to be.
My parents drove me all the way across the country from Southern California, where I graduated from high school, to Virginia Tech in the mountains of southwestern Virginia, where I was going to be an aerospace engineering major. That's what I got accepted for. Because again, I wanted to do something with NASA, and that was going to be tied in. Virginia Tech was one of the top 3 aerospace engineering schools in the country at that time. They had the first supersonic wind tunnel in a civilian facility, blah, blah, blah. So NASA was doing a lot of work with them. So my parents drive me all the way across the country. It took 3 days to get there. They helped me schlep my foot locker up to the 6th floor of the dormitory, and they got in the car and headed back west. The next day, I went in to meet my guidance counselor in aerospace engineering. And this fellow sat me down. He said, son, what are you doing in aerospace engineering? Haven't you heard they just canceled the Apollo program? You won't be able to get a job as an aerospace engineer for the next 15 years. You need to find something else. Well, welcome to Virginia Tech. So this is literally, I couldn't talk to him. There were no cell phones, and my parents were on the road. So I walked out of the building and walked 2 buildings down, walked in, and there's this kind of hippie kind of guy walking with, cutoffs and a t-shirt and carrying a tray of Petri dishes across. And I asked him what building that was. It was the biology building. So I asked if I could join them. So he walked me to the administration. So by the time my parents got back to California, 3 days after dropping me off as an aerospace engineering major, I was a biology major.
You just never know.
Yeah. So it just, and it all worked out.
It didn't all work out. Yeah, this is the thing. You just never know. Everybody needs a hippie carrying petri dishes in their life, truthfully. They all
Yeah,
need that.
yeah.
That's incredible. That's so cool. I'm sorry to the Apollo team, but that's really cool. You've answered kind of my questions about, the book as a whole. And this was an incredible idea and something that I think that a lot of people are going to be really interested in wanting to hear, especially like as someone like me who just still has no idea. This sounds really inspiring. So you've decided to publish the book. Can you tell us about your experience of working with us, 10 Hut Media, like on your book? What
Sure.
aspects of the publishing process, like maybe, have you found the most valuable? We'll start with that. As someone who's never published before, other than academically.
As I'm sure you know, it was news to me, but as you know, the world of publishing memoirs is a difficult one to get any full-time publishers to carry, because most publishers, from what I understand today, and I'm learning about this, they don't want to take somebody on unless there's a series of 6 or 8 books involved. Mm-hmm. So they'll get you on because they realize the first one's going to be a money loser, and then hopefully you get a bigger audience and they make money on the other ones. Well, memoirs, maybe 1 or 2 and you're done. So there are not a lot of publishing houses that are looking for people doing memoirs. So a lot of people today have gone the route of this newer thing with self-publishing, but I didn't like the solo self-publishing thing because I'm smart enough to know what I don't know, and I don't know about that. And I felt that I would like to have some kind of guidance, somebody looking over my shoulder to make sure I'm going down the right direction, somebody to be like my physicist buddy who tore it apart the first time in my medical writing. Then I came across the 10 Hut Media thing. I also, having been in the military for the 24 years, I tend to listen to a lot of military-related podcasts and read a lot of military-related books. And Severn Publishing and 10 Hut Media came to my attention. And I read about that online, about it's like a blend of the two. You have a lot more of your own skin in the game to begin with, but also you have somebody helping guide you through that. And to me, that's been a huge benefit of 10 Hut Media, because you get assigned an editor / publisher, whatever you want to call it, and they are a coordinator for the different people. Number one, they get you in touch with an editor who can review your manuscript, give some, general comments, see if it reads, because I think especially early on, this stuff was interesting to me, but I wasn't sure how interesting it was to somebody else. Is this just a flash in the pan? Am I just dreaming here? Or is it really something there? So that was very helpful, having that feedback. And then also down to the nitty gritty. Once you get through that, well, how about a cover? You'd think that's pretty simple, but I never realized how much effort goes into picking a cover, and, helping fabricate a cover and going back and forth and back and forth. And that was very helpful. And I think the result is a lot better than if I'd tried to just do something on my own. The next step that we're in the midst of right now is the formatting of the book. People say, well, how many pages is it? And, well, I don't know. It depends on the formatting, right? How big the font is and the size of the pages and all that. And then I needed advice on, for instance, the photos I wanted to put in there to try to go along with it and tell the story, especially since a lot of this is about the art. I want to have some good quality photos of the art there. But you get to see me in my nerdy stages back in high school too, putting together rocket displays in the local library in San Antonio, Texas. So there's a little bit of everything with that. So I found the ability to have somebody to talk to be very valuable. And as we go forward, help with the social media. That's something that I am not very versed with, and could use some help with that, and hopefully that will help me out. One of the biggest pieces of advice I got early on was, they said, well, who's your target audience? It's a good thing to think about early on. So I was able to put together a list, and I've got, I think this will have appeal to aviators. It'll have appeal to military. It'll have a special appeal to military brats. It'll have appeal to medical people, cancer specialists and non-cancer specialists. It'll have appeal hopefully to artists, because it shows how we're all kind of tied together, and how over life, different things bubble up to the surface as important, but then they go down a little bit as the kaleidoscope turns. Something else comes up, but then as the kaleidoscope turns, it comes back up again.
Yeah.
So the having the 10 Hut Media at my back kind of helped me guide those currents has been very useful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then once again, like, you've answered my questions about like the expectations and then like why you chose to go the co-publishing route.
Right.
So I guess that leaves me with my last question, actually, which is, what advice would you like to give to professionals in demanding careers such as yours was, who harbor those creative aspirations but maybe haven't yet pursued them?
Well, and I would say not just professionals, but everybody. I mean, I've run into many people who seem to think they're locked into doing one thing in life. And I think that's the one message I want to get across too. Not that you have to have multiple careers or, I've probably got an extreme of different things I've been able to accomplish. Despite all the initial no, I've converted a lot of those to a yes down the road. But I think that, no matter who you are and no matter how much you're just focused in doing one thing, take some time and just turn the kaleidoscope a little bit. Try something totally different, a little thing. If you've never read a particular kind of book, go ahead and read one. If you don't like it, you can say you've done it. If you want to pick up a paintbrush, you don't have to show it to anybody. You just do it yourself. I mean, I didn't show anybody my art for 30 years. And now I've been lucky enough to have it in international collections and around the States. So you just never can tell what's going to pique your interest. But if you never look outside the box, you'll never know that there's other boxes out there. And I would say you don't need to commit like I'm going to change my life and I'm going to do 5 new things. Just try something a little different. Try a different kind of restaurant, eat some food you've never had before. There's something simple like that. And you'd be amazed at the doors that open up. I mean, the different people I've met in these different walks of life, it's just been astonishing to me. I was told that due to some medical things, I would never be able to be a pilot. And here I sit. I've been a pilot now for 43 years. I've got over 3,000 hours in 70 different types of aircraft. You never take no. I mean, there's always, not always, but there's usually some kind of workaround to get pretty far along what you wanted to do. And even if you end up not doing exactly what you thought, have a really good shot at being happy with what you end up doing.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Doug, for your words and for your story. We are so excited to bring your book to life, and we will keep everybody updated as the news comes out. So thank you again, Doug, for joining us.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And good luck to everybody out there. Keep your kaleidoscope turning.